You are not broken. You were trained to feel broken. You look in the mirror, and the reflection hesitates back. You see the familiar doubts flickering in your eyes, the hesitation in your stance, the unspoken questions curling in your mind. Am I enough? Will they like me? Should I change? These are not natural thoughts. They whispered to you in the shadows of your earliest days, in the tender spaces where you first sought love. You were taught that reaching for attention could never be simple. A smile left unnoticed, a hug withheld, praise that arrived only after obedience, only after compliance. You were learning silently that love was conditional, like a fragile bird perched just out of reach. You stretch your hands, and it hovers away. Each small disappointment becomes a lesson carved into your nervous system. You are not enough. The world didn't need to say it out loud. The quiet echoes were louder. Every glance, every tone, every withheld acknowledgement was training you to doubt yourself. And now, decades later, the same mirror that shows your face reflects the patterns you never chose, but were drilled into you. You were never naturally insecure. You were trained to believe it. This self-doubt masquerades as your own, sneaking in like a shadow that claims your mind. You blame yourself when someone ignores your message, when a friend doesn't call back, when success seems slower than it should. You think it's your fault. You punish yourself for asking for too much, for caring too deeply, for wanting attention. You rehearse the apologies in your head. You measure every word, every smile, every gesture. It feels intimate, personal, inevitable, but it is not. Approval-seeking, second-guessing, even subtle self-sabotage are not signs of weakness. They are echoes of lessons implanted long before you could fight back. Look closely at your life. The friends you chase, the relationships you bend to, the career choices you doubt yourself in. They are not accidents. They are evidence of invisible rules imposed upon you. You have been trained to mistake manipulation for love, control for care, and emptiness for your own fault. Behind every pattern, there is a puppeteer. You never see the strings, but they are there. Your family, your school, society itself, silent architects of a script you were born to perform. Praise was given sparingly, withdrawn subtly, meted out like coins from a treasury you could never access freely. The world taught you to beg, to negotiate, to shrink. Every please you utter, every internal hesitation, every self-questioning moment is the residue of training. You were not born chasing validation. You were molded to it. And the cruelest part is how subtle it is. You think you are choosing, deciding, acting naturally. But every move is guided, nudged, corrected by lessons you learned before you could even articulate your own needs. The strings are invisible, but their effect is undeniable. A life lived in quiet submission, always seeking what should have been freely given. The realization is harsh, almost unbearable. It forces you to pause, to breathe, to stare into the raw truth. The insecurity you feel is a reflection of external training, not internal failure. It does not define your worth. It defines the subtle violence of what was taught to you, the unspoken contracts of affection, the hidden economy of attention. You were not weak. You were conditioned. You were not flawed. You were instructed. And now, awareness is the first blade of freedom cutting through the fog. You feel the weight lift. Not because the world has changed, but because you have finally seen the mechanism. You were trained to beg. Today, you choose to stand. You think love feels natural. But sometimes, what you call love is just a lesson you were forced to learn. You chase approval like it is air. Every compliment, every like, every nod of acknowledgement feels like survival. The approval you seek is a ghost, an echo of childhood voices whispering rules you can't even remember. You speak carefully, smile strategically, shrink when you need to, expand when they notice, all in a rhythm you never chose. It feels safe, like dancing on thin ice, but each step cracks the surface beneath you. You convince yourself that bending is love, that compromise is kindness, that chasing is care, but in truth, it is a cage built of expectations. You are feeding a hollow ghost, thinking it is real. You notice the tension in your chest, the subtle ache behind every effort to please. In meetings, in friendships, in social media, you calibrate your presence, your voice, your opinions to meet invisible standards. It feels natural because you've rehearsed it for decades. But the truth is terrifying. Safety came at the cost of freedom. Comfort came at the cost of authenticity. Every time you seek approval, you are reminded of the invisible walls surrounding you. Walls you didn't build but were taught to honor. You trade small pieces of your soul for fleeting validation, and the moment passes, leaving you hungry again. Romance often became the arena where this training was sharpened. As a teenager, you felt the rush of attention and the sting of neglect, each shaping your heart into a pattern of need. You learned to negotiate for love, a compliment here, a favor there, compromise of your true desires for a flicker of connection. Jealousy taught you vigilance. Compromise taught you self-erasure. Every crush, every early heartbreak, every small betrayal became a lesson in survival disguised as affection. You observed who withdrew, who withheld, who only rewarded compliance. You internalized these patterns without realizing it. As adults, we replicate them automatically. We stay in relationships that demand our obedience. We bend ourselves for fleeting attention. We argue, plead, and perform, thinking it is love, but really, it is training, a rehearsal of neediness our hearts absorbed long before we could articulate it. You replay these scripts with astonishing fidelity, wondering why authentic connection feels elusive. The answer is simple. What you are practicing is not love, but conditioned behavior, learned in the crucible of early emotional survival. Society, too, plays its role, disguising conditioning as love, painting neediness as romance, obligation as care. Advertising, media, peer norms, all whisper that worth comes from validation, that happiness is borrowed from others. You see perfect couples, celebrated careers, social approval, and you chase it, believing it is authentic. You date partners who demand compromise, thinking that compromise is love. You seek friends who offer conditional loyalty, thinking it is care. You post, curate, edit, perform, believing that visibility is connection. And all the while, your conditioning is invisible, woven into the narrative so seamlessly that it feels innate. You believe you are acting naturally, but the strings are pulled by centuries of cultural expectation, societal praise, and the subtle instruction you absorbed as a child. The betrayal is profound. What felt natural, spontaneous, and desirable was never yours to claim. You were trained to seek, trained to beg, trained to chase. And only when you see the illusion can you start to step off the stage of false comforts. This is the harsh, cinematic truth, the chase for approval, the patterns of romantic compromise, the sweet poison of societal expectation. None of it is authentic love. It is a script written for you, rehearsed by forces you cannot easily see. You are left with the ache, the hunger, and the realization that what you sought was never real. But awareness is the first liberation. Recognition allows choice, understanding that comfort can be false, that love can be learned as needed, that approval is not life. It allows you to step away from the ghostly dance. You do not have to feed the hollow any longer. You do not have to chase what is not real. You can finally recognize what is authentic, what is yours, what is alive. You were trained to chase. Today, you choose to receive it. Until you make the unconscious conscious, It will direct your life and you will call it fate. You carry ghosts. They are small at first, whispers in a room that should have been safe, a critical word from a parent, a glance that measured worth, love given only when you followed invisible rules. You learned that affection was conditional, that attention came as a reward, and that disapproval lingered like a shadow long after the moment passed. These childhood wounds were not just memories, they were blueprints. They shaped how your heart learned to beat in fear, how your mind learned to calculate affection, how your soul learned to shrink before being seen. Every neglected hug, every silenced voice, every whispered expectation became a layer of shadow within you. These ghosts follow you into adulthood, not as monsters to fight, but as architects shaping unseen corridors. You are not at fault. You were a child, and the world trained you in the currency of conditional love. You absorbed it, unknowingly, and it became a hidden part of who you are. You begin to see that the anxiety, the doubt, the persistent feeling of not measuring up, they are not failures of character, they are echoes of early wounds that still dictate the rhythm of your life. These shadows act as an unseen compass, guiding choices you think are free. The people you choose, the partners you gravitate toward, the friends you trust, the work you pursue, they are all filtered through patterns formed before your conscious mind fully developed. You are drawn to the familiar, even if it harms you, because familiarity has been coded into your nervous system. You gravitate toward those who mirror the neglect you endured, those who challenge your boundaries in ways that replay old lessons, those who reward compliance and punish authenticity. Even your career choices, the way you measure success or avoid risk, are subtly orchestrated by the shadows of your early experiences. You feel instinctively that something is off, that certain relationships are magnetic yet destructive, yet the reason remains hidden. The shadow does not scream, it whispers, nudges, tilts the scales, and because it is unseen, you call it chance, personality, or fate, never suspecting the silent architect that moves your life in patterns it designed long ago. Repetition becomes a prison. You try to act differently, to step outside destructive cycles, yet the patterns persist. A partner betrays, and the response is shock, but also a curious familiarity. A colleague dismisses your contribution, and you shrink, but also with a learned reflex. You recognize the cycle, but awareness alone cannot break it. The shadow operates beneath consciousness, replaying lessons absorbed before you could question them. Every attempt to change meets resistance, because the unconscious seeks what is known, what is comfortable, even if painful. This is why you see yourself repeating the same mistakes, drawn to the same conflicts, drawn to the same relational traps. You are both victim and participant. The patterns feel like gravity, inescapable, undeniable, relentless, but they are not fate. They are trained behavior, echoes of wounds you have not yet faced. You are living a script written in childhood, performed in adulthood, and misunderstood as choice. Understanding this is the first step toward mastery, because only when the hidden patterns are illuminated can you begin to act consciously, to choose differently, to reclaim freedom. The shadows are not your enemy. They are the parts of yourself that have been ignored, denied, and unacknowledged. They are teachers disguised as tormentors, insisting that you confront what you once could not. The moment you see them clearly, those silent architects of your life, you reclaim the power they once held over you. You no longer drift unknowingly through patterns of repetition. You begin to navigate life intentionally, guided not by unhealed wounds, but by conscious choice. And with this recognition comes both humility and liberation. You understand why you reacted, why you stayed, why you compromised, and now you can stop the cycle. The unconscious becomes conscious. The ghost becomes light. You are not your wounds. You are the one who sees them. You cannot heal what you do not first see. And what you see may terrify you. You have worn masks for so long that you no longer recognize the face beneath them. Each smile, each word, each gesture is carefully curated to secure approval, affection, and acceptance. At work, you project competence even when doubt roars inside you. In relationships, you offer perfection while your own needs remain hidden, quiet, unacknowledged. The self you present is polished, rehearsed, and strategic. You have convinced yourself it is you, yet every reflection in the mirror whispers a subtle accusation. Who are you really? Behind the mask lies a fragmented identity, pieces scattered across every attempt to please, to perform, to avoid rejection. You've learned to hide from the truth, believing that the person beneath is unworthy of love. Every compliment feels foreign, every connection fleeting, because it is never truly offered to the whole of you. You experience life in rehearsals, in performances, in fragments of your authentic self. And slowly, quietly, the mask begins to crack. Then comes the fall. The illusions you have built, the relationships, the jobs, the roles start to crumble. A message goes unanswered. A friend betrays trust. A partner leaves unexpectedly. And suddenly, the walls you leaned on collapse, and you are standing in the ruins of your own constructed identity. The ground beneath you feels like shattered glass. Every step cuts, every breath trembles with the weight of emptiness. Shame floods through your chest. An uninvited guest from the earliest lessons of conditional love. You realize that everything you held onto, approval, admiration, affection, was never authentic security. It was a fragile scaffold built to prop up a self that existed only to be accepted. You see how the patterns of bending, compromising, performing, and chasing were never true freedom, never true love, but rehearsals for this collapse. And in this moment, the collapse is absolute, immersive, and undeniable. Yet, in the ruins lies a doorway. Facing the void is terrifying. Silence presses down, empty and infinite. You feel unmoored, untethered, stripped of the scripts and masks that once defined you. The void stares back with a cold, unflinching gaze, and in it you confront the question you have avoided. Who am I without the masks? Who am I without their approval? Fear rises, trembling with the instinct to flee, to retreat into familiar patterns of control and performance. But this confrontation is necessary. The void is not punishment, it is revelation. Within its emptiness lies the possibility of rebirth. Here, for the first time, you encounter the raw, unmediated self, unpolished, unperfected, real. The masks have fallen, the walls have shattered, the familiar scaffolds have dissolved. And in that terrifying clarity, you begin to recognize that collapse is not defeat. It is the prelude to wholeness. Only by facing emptiness can you rebuild from a foundation of truth rather than conditioned illusion. You inhale the stillness. You see the fragments of your identity not as broken pieces, but as raw materials for reinvention. You feel the weight of what was lost, yet also the stirrings of freedom. The person you were hiding from, the authentic you, has finally stepped into view. And though fear lingers, you understand that power begins with acknowledgement, that growth begins with collapse, that healing begins with the courage to face the void. You are no longer hiding. You are no longer performing. You are present, raw, and awake to the possibility of real self-rooted existence. You are not your mask. You are the life beneath it. Love is not possession. It is the free unfolding of the soul. You have spent years believing that what you felt was love. The longing, the compromises, the constant adjustments, they all felt like love because your heart was taught to interpret them that way. But now you begin to see the difference. Love is not a transaction. It does not demand performance or compliance. It does not hinge on your ability to meet another's expectations. True love is expansive. It allows space for both individuals to exist fully. What you were taught to call love, the constant seeking, the subtle fear of rejection, the endless negotiation, was actually needed disguised as affection. You were responding to a conditioned script, mistaking survival for connection. You learned to give yourself in increments, withholding your authentic self until acceptance arrived. You learned to shape your desires to match the contours of another's approval, and because you had no alternative, you believed it was love. But now clarity arrives, like dawn piercing a long night. Need and dependency are not love. They are echoes of early training, patterns meant to ensure obedience and emotional compliance. Recognizing this distinction is the first step in reclaiming the heart you thought you had lost. The agenda behind what you mistook for love becomes clear when you look back. Early lessons of conditional attention, praise metered like a ration, and subtle criticism that measured your worth were never neutral. They were designed to guide, to shape, to control. Every moment of praise or punishment was a lesson in obedience, teaching you that love is earned, never freely given. You bend, you negotiate, you apologize before you need to. All rehearsals drilled into you long before you could question them. Romantic relationships, friendships, and even family bonds often continued the pattern. You think you chose freely, yet much of your life was influenced by these invisible instructions. The realization is startling. What you interpreted as love was often an invitation to perform, to chase, to kneel. Your heart was conditioned to beg, and your spirit was taught that to be loved, you must surrender pieces of yourself. This is not your fault. It is the subtle violence of social, familial, and cultural instruction. But now, awareness illuminates the hidden agenda. The chain is visible. The strings can be cut. This is your threshold of liberation. Awareness transforms confusion into clarity. Recognizing that what you chased was not love opens the doorway to self-sovereignty. For the first time, you understand that your worth is intrinsic, not conditional, and that love, when authentic, honors who you are rather than who you are trained to be. The liberation begins quietly, an internal shift of perspective, a recognition that your heart can be whole without begging for pieces of someone else's approval. The weight of illusion begins to lift. You feel a subtle trembling, a pulse of possibility, a horizon of freedom expanding within you. With this clarity, you can choose differently, relate differently, and finally embrace a love rooted in truth rather than training. You are no longer a participant in a scripted performance. You are awake, aware, and free to respond as your authentic self.
You were trained to beg. Today you choose to receive it freely.
Knowing your darkness is the best method for dealing with the light. The first step is always the hardest, turning toward the darkness you have long avoided. The shame you buried, the fear you hid beneath performances, the wounds you refused to name, all of it waits quietly, patiently, and unyielding. You may feel a shiver as memories surface, as forgotten pain drifts into awareness, as the familiar ache of rejection reawakens. You realize that your life has been shaped not only by what you experienced, but by what you refused to face. This is no gentle confrontation. It is a descent into the parts of yourself you were trained to ignore, deny, or despise. You must face them directly, your self-doubt, your conditioned neediness, the patterns that have dictated your choices. Each memory is a mirror, reflecting the hidden influence of early conditioning. You feel the tension rise, the instinct to flee or distract, but courage is required. To meet the shadow is not cruelty, it is necessity. Only by naming the fear, acknowledging the shame, And sitting with the pain, can you begin to reclaim the power that has been quietly siphoned from you? The act of turning toward darkness is itself a declaration. I am here, I will see, I will own. Once you have the courage to confront these shadows, dialogue begins. This is not a battle, it is a conversation. You write in a journal, capturing the patterns that surface. You ask yourself difficult questions. Why did I stay when it hurt? Why did I bend instead of asserting my truth? When did I learn that begging was love? You speak to the parts of yourself that were silenced, that retreated in fear, that believed unworthiness was truth. Reflection is the flashlight in the darkness, illuminating corridors you avoided for decades. Meditation, journaling, even speaking aloud to the hidden self allows the shadow to be acknowledged rather than denied. You observe without judgment the habits, impulses, and fears that once ruled your life. Slowly, the invisible puppeteer loses grip. You recognize that the parts you feared are not enemies, they are teachers, guides, and guardians of insight. By turning inward and conversing with your shadow, you reclaim agency over choices that once felt inevitable. You realize the power you sought externally was always available internally, waiting for your courage to engage. Integration is the ultimate transformation. The more you embrace these hidden aspects, the more conditioned behaviors begin to dissolve. The reflex to chase approval softens. The instinct to beg for affection fades. You see yourself clearly, unmasked and whole, and your responses shift from fear-driven survival to conscious self-respect. You notice patterns repeating less frequently, as awareness replaces compulsion. The shadow, once a source of shame, becomes a reservoir of power. Every suppressed impulse, every hidden wound, every conditioned fear, when met and accepted, strengthens your autonomy. The act of integration is cinematic in its subtlety, a quiet yet profound shift in energy, perception, and behavior. You realize that power is never given. It is reclaimed. The life you have lived in shadows now steps into light, not through avoidance, but through direct engagement. You become the master of your patterns rather than their victim. Strength emerges not from perfection, but from acceptance, courage, and conscious choice. This is the heart of empowerment, facing what you were trained to hide, conversing with it honestly, and allowing transformation to occur. The shadow is no longer a tyrant, but a companion, guiding you toward wholeness. You understand that your worth was never conditional, your heart never inadequate, and your life never scripted without recourse. By embracing all that you are, light and dark, fear and courage, shadow and self, you step into mastery. You are no longer the person trained to beg. You are the one who meets themselves fully, walks with awareness, and chooses freely. You are not your shadow. You are the one who embraces it and rises. Peace is not the absence of storms, but the presence of yourself amidst them. Love is no longer something you chase. It no longer feels like a transaction, a performance, or a desperate plea for validation. Authentic love begins within you. Water your own roots, nourish your own heart, and create a life where affection flows freely, not as repayment but as choice. You learn to recognize when love is genuine and when it is a conditioned need. The warmth you crave is no longer borrowed from others' approval. It blooms from the acceptance of your own worth. You see yourself clearly without masks, without compromise of self, for the sake of fleeting approval. Love, when rooted in self-respect, becomes a mirror of your integrity, a reflection of your authentic self. It does not demand or control, it invites and supports. You can hold space for connection without sacrificing your essence, and in this clarity, the chaos of conditioned longing loses its power. The power of choice becomes your guiding principle. Each decision, what you say, What you do, who you allow into your life, shifts from reflexive response to conscious selection. You observe patterns without judgment, recognize triggers without panic, and act deliberately rather than react unconsciously. You choose who deserves your energy, how you engage with your emotions, and when to walk away from anything that replicates old conditioning. Every choice is a reclamation of agency, a declaration that you no longer drift on currents you did not generate. In daily life, this looks like setting boundaries, voicing needs, and embracing honesty even when it feels uncomfortable. It is the subtle, persistent reclaiming of power, a quiet rebellion against the chaos of old programming. You realize that freedom is not abstract. It is enacted in each decision, each moment where you act as the master of your own heart. Walking free is a cinematic moment you live, not just imagine. Picture yourself stepping into the world with integrity, unburdened by fear, unchained from patterns of begging and compliance. You navigate relationships with clarity, move through challenges with calm, and embrace solitude without panic. Life is no longer a series of compromises dictated by shadows and external expectations. It is a canvas where you paint with the colors of self-respect, awareness, and inner peace. The storms may still arrive, but now you stand grounded, your gaze steady, your steps deliberate. Each breath becomes a testament to your sovereignty. Each action becomes proof that you have chosen peace over chaos, authenticity over performance, love over longing. You are whole, you are present, you are free. Peace begins within. You are home.